Hello, my name's Scott Dannemiller. I'm the president of Lifework Associates. It's good to be back here with you again this year. If you were with us last year, you know that we covered session one of navigating tough conversations, and this year's the follow on, session two. So let's get right to it and we'll start. You should have a small packet in front of you. If you don't, that's okay. You could still participate, but you'll notice there on page one of the handout that it asks you to identify your own real world tough conversation that you're going through. And here's how we're defining that. Anytime there's a difference of opinion where emotions could be strong and it's imperative that the conversation goes well. So take a moment, think about it. Could be with a leader, staff member, could be with a member of the church, kids, spouse, neighbor, anybody, because these concepts apply across your life. And we'll take a moment to pause the video and you can identify who this person is, or maybe it's a group, and what the topic is. And then hit play and we'll continue. So I'll give you a moment to pause now. All right, you've identified your real world situation. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the information today so that you can apply the different tips and tricks in bits and pieces to help take this tough conversation from a place of conflict and stalemate to a place of relationship building and actual progress and collaboration. Now, you'll remember last time we introduced this concept of being lost at sea when we're in these conversations. And it's natural for things not to go well whenever there are these differences of opinion. It truly is nature, a situation to explain that. Imagine you're camping. I have to imagine I'm camping because I don't camp. I camp if there's air conditioning. But you're camping, nighttime, hear a rustle in the bushes. What are you going to do? Many of you will hunker down in the tent, stay silent, hope the moment passes. Others of you may take a stronger approach, grab a baseball bat or whatever's next to you, go out and protect yourself and your family. Here's probably what you're not going to do. And that's grab your phone and go, I bet that's the cutest little animal you ever did see. I'm going to go take a picture of that. Like, natural selection weeds those people out of our gene pool pretty quickly. There's what is natural in our brains is when an information vacuum exists, there's some uncertainty there. Our brain automatically assumes the worst for good reason. It keeps us alive. Unfortunately, that same thing applies to conversations whenever our lives may not really be threatened, but our brain thinks they are. So we're going to get lost at sea, meaning we're going to create this negative story, that's the S, in our head that's going to create some emotion in us that leads us to act or behave in a way that's not going to be beneficial. So especially if it's a long-term conversation, I may be saying this person's selfish, going to do whatever it takes to protect themselves, can't be trusted, and that's going to create some skepticism, anxiety in me, maybe even anger. And then I'm going to act out by not listening, perhaps even being aggressive with my point of view, telling half-truths, may have some information here that I could share, but I'm not going to share it because I'm afraid it could be used against me or could be misconstrued. That's a recipe for failure. What we do know in these situations is it starts with us, and our job is to try to lower the temperature of these difficult conversations so that collaboration can take place. Now, what elevates the temperature? One thing is feeling trapped. I want option A. You want option B. Option A, I know because I want it. It's the right answer. And I need to win, so I'm feeling trapped. I'm either going to win or lose. That's going to elevate the temperature, the anxiety in this conversation. Feeling misunderstood. I feel like you don't know what I want or need, and you misinterpret what I'm saying. That's going to elevate the temperature, my frustration. And a third thing is maybe you do understand me. And maybe we've articulated a few different options, more than option A and B, but I feel like you're ignoring my point of view, discounting everything I say. You're dismissing me. That creates some real frustration. Now, we have tools to deal with this. Two of these that we're going to pull forward from the last session: clarifying interest, assuming positive intent. They're still going to be applicable today. A third that we'll introduce today is called the confirm paraphrase. And honestly, this is the killer app when it comes to navigating tough conversations and lowering the temperature. A quick recap on clarifying interests. Remember, there's a difference between position and interest. My position is what I say I want, that option A. My interest is why I want that. What's my motivation? What am I truly after? What's underneath the ask? The example we gave last time was a pastor and a staff member. Staff member was responsible for a newsletter, sent it out, and things didn't go well. There was some messaging in there that wasn't consistent with the theology, the culture of the church, the organization, and so it created some challenges. So the result of that says, Kurt says, option A, hey, I want 1 week to review newsletters. Nancy says, option B, I really want to work independently. There's a natural conflict. Now, if we start debating which of those is best, that temperature in that conversation is going to escalate. But if we start to ask some curious questions and say, listen, why do you want that? And what is it you really want? Kurt may say, well, why I want it, I just want to make sure that doesn't happen again and things go well. Well, okay, so we know what you don't want. What do you really want? And he may say, as you see here, in the real world scenario, Kurt says, I don't really want to check things. I want to be very efficient, but I also want to just assure that messages are aligned and consistent and with what we want as a church. And Nancy said, you know what? I don't mind working with other people too. I want to work collaboratively, but I also want to be creative and be able to use different techniques to engage my audience on this. Well, now notice what happens. Instead of option A and option B, we now have options C, D, and E. What if we work on the next one together? Or what if you tell me what the topics are and I'll give you some, if I'm Kurt, I'll give you perhaps some resources you could use. Or maybe I'll let you know if there's any sticky areas we need to worry about. And clarifying positions and interests gets us off of option A and B and into some new territory where we can collaborate. And assuming positive intent all starts with me as well. There's another person in this conversation, and a way to assure we're going to be successful is I've got to start by assuming this person has a positive intent. What positive outcome is this smart, reasonable, conscientious person seeking, and why? There's a good reason for them having the position that they have and their interests. I may not agree with them, but there's a good reason. And oftentimes it's not selfish. There is a bigger picture reason. And I just need to assume that about other people and articulate that to them so that they also agree and see that I'm seeing the best in them. And that is going to go many miles toward having a collaborative conversation. So that recap is on page 2 of your resource guide that we've provided, but you got it here. Now, let's have a scenario to set up our third tool and our biggest point for today, that confirm paraphrase. Scenario, this is real. Change the names and a little bit of the situation to protect those that were involved, but we'll start. Julia is part of this scenario. Worried about an upcoming meeting I have with Janice, the preschool director, to talk about a possible job promotion. I've been a part-time sub for a while, but have been steadily growing in my role. Janice has given me increasing responsibility over the past several months, filling in for a person who was away on leave. It's been a great learning experience for me as I've had the chance to navigate some rocky situations, dealing with discipline and interacting with parents. Still, I'm afraid that Janice is not going to move me to the full-time teacher role as she has unreasonably high expectations. And so I'm preparing to advocate for myself in this upcoming meeting. So if you're Julia, why might you be concerned about this conversation? Obviously, I want a promotion. I'm afraid I'm not going to get it, but there's probably some other concerns. Janice, I may not feel like Janice really understands what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Janice may not understand my motivations truly. Janice may not understand how much effort I'm putting into this. But the other reason I might be concerned as Julia is there's a difference in a power dynamic here. Julia, it's not your decision to make. It's Janice's decision, and therefore I'm having to advocate for myself, make some points, bring my information to this meeting, and that might make me anxious about this conversation. Now, what about on Janice's side? Here's Janice. I'm the church preschool director, and I'm preparing for a conversation with Julia. I know she has her heart set on taking on a classroom of her own, but I don't believe she's ready. Last month, while taking over for another teacher on leave, she failed to directly address a classroom behavior issue, which led to an escalating fight between kids in the classroom. Unfortunately, the problem was multiplied when she met with parents afterward and dismissed their concerns, which was perceived as condescending. I want to focus on how Julia can grow and table the promotion discussion for later. Now, if you're Janice, think about this. How will you likely prepare for this conversation? Gut reaction for me, if I'm Janice, I am getting all my ducks in a row so that I can say, here's what's required of the position. Here's been how you performed. Here are my concerns about it, and lay it out. And my hope is that Julia will say, you know what, Janice, you're right. I'm not ready. Thank you for letting me know. I really appreciate it. Now, what are the odds that's going to happen? Pretty slim, right? We'd like to think that we have to believe in miracles, right? But in situations where there's a difference in power dynamic and there's a difference in wants and needs and perceptions, the odds that both people are going to walk out of this conversation going, man, that was great. I can't wait to have another conversation. Those chances are slim. However, what we do want the outcome of this to be is maybe we don't all walk out with that kind of happy feeling, but hopefully we find some sort of agreement that we can both accept and support, and that our relationship is intact and we understand that both of us value one another. Sounds easy. Not so much, but there's some great tools that we can use to help us get there. And here's where we're going to lean on Dr. William Ury. Dr. William Ury is the leader of the Harvard Negotiation Project, wrote a book called Getting to Yes, another one, Getting Past No. He is a negotiation expert, has been involved in international negotiations in some of the diciest situations you can imagine. And he's all about the listening. Listening is the missing half of communication, absolutely necessary, but often overlooked. Now, what does he mean by listening? We all think we know what we mean by listening, but how do we demonstrate that we're doing it? And I'm going to show you part of a TED Talk from Dr. William Ury. It's a 15-minute talk. If you want to look it up later, it's called The Power of Listening. Great. We'll look at less than half of it, but it provides some key examples that we can leverage to talk about this idea of confirm, paraphrase, and some of the nuances behind it. So take a moment and watch this video.
So why listen? Why is it so important to listen? Let me tell you a story. Some years ago, I was in the country of Venezuela, serving as a third party between the government and the political opposition at a time of intense conflict, with a lot of people fearing a civil war. My colleague Francisco Diaz and I had an appointment with the president, Hugo Chavez, at 9 p.m. at the presidential palace. Finally, at midnight, we were ushered in to see the president, who had his entire cabinet arrayed behind him. And he asked me, so, Ury, what do you think of the situation going on here? And I said, Mr. President, I've been talking to your ministers here and to the opposition, and I think you're making some progress. Progress? What do you mean, progress? He shouted. You're blind. You're not seeing all the dirty tricks those traitors are up to. And he leaned in very close to my face and proceeded to shout. What was I going to do? Part of me felt like defending myself naturally. But what good would it do for me to get into an argument with the president of Venezuela? How would that advance peace? So I just listened. I gave him my full attention. I listened to where he was coming from. And President Chavez was known, he was famous for making 8-hour speeches. But after 30 minutes of me just nodding and listening, I saw his shoulders slowly sag. And he said to me in a very weary tone of voice, so Ury, what should I do? That's the sound of a human mind opening. opening to listen. So I said, Mr. President, it's almost Christmas. The country needs a break. Last year, all the festivities were canceled because of the conflict. Why not propose a truce this time so that people can enjoy the holidays with their families, and after that, everybody will maybe be in a better mood to listen? He said, that's a great idea. I'm going to announce that in my next speech. His mood had completely shifted. How? Through the simple power of listening. Because I listened to him, he was more ready to listen to me. So there are at least 3 important reasons why it's important to listen in any negotiation or conflict. The first is that it helps us understand the other side. Negotiation, after all, is an exercise in influence. You're trying to change someone else's mind. How can you possibly change someone else's mind if you don't know where their mind is? Listening is key. The second reason, just as important, is it helps us connect with the other human being. It helps us build rapport. It builds trust. It shows we care. After all, everybody wants to be heard. And the third is, as with President Chavez, it makes it more likely that the other person is going to listen to us. It helps us get to yes. In short, listening may be the cheapest concession we can make in a negotiation. It costs us nothing, and it brings huge benefits. Listening may be the golden key that opens the door to human relationship. So how do we listen? Well, it turns out that we often take listening for granted as something easy and natural. But in fact, at least in my experience, real listening, genuine listening, is something that needs to be learned and practiced every day. In ordinary listening, we're hearing the words and we're often thinking, where do I agree? Where do I disagree? What am I going to say in response? In other words, the focus is on us. In genuine listening, however, the spotlight moves to the other person. We put ourselves in their shoes. We tune into their wavelength. We listen from within their frame of reference, not just ours. And that's not easy. In genuine listening, we listen not just for what's being said, but for what's not being said. We listen not just to the words, but to what's behind the words. We listen for the underlying emotions and feelings, the underlying needs, what that person really needs or wants. Let me give you an example. About 1.5 years ago, I was invited to ask a Brazilian entrepreneur by the name of Abilio Diniz to help him because he was trapped in a titanic legal dispute with his French business partner over the control of Brazil's largest retailer. The Financial Times called it perhaps the biggest cross-continental boardroom showdown in recent history. It had gone on for 2.5 years, and it was immensely costly and stressful, not only to both parties, but to their families and the 150,000 employees of the company. So when I sat down with Abilio in his home, I listened to his story, and after that I had a question. I said, Abilio, help me understand here. What do you really want? And he said, well, I want the stock at a certain price. I want, the company headquarters. I want the elimination of the non-compete clause. And he gave me a list. But I, as I listened, heard something deeper there that was unspoken. So I asked him, Abilio, you're a man who seems to have everything. What are these things really going to give you? What do you most want in your life? And he paused for a moment and thought about it. And finally he said, freedom. I want my freedom. I want to be free to pursue my business dreams, and I want to be free to spend time with my family. That was it. I was hearing the human being behind the words, not just the champion businessman. And so once we were clear about his deepest need, then the negotiation itself, while challenging, became a lot easier. And in 4 short days, my colleagues and I, by listening to the other side, were able to take this titanic dispute and resolve it with a settlement that left both sides highly satisfied. As Abilio, who became a friend in the process, later told me, I got everything I wanted, but most importantly, I got my life back. How did that happen? Through the simple power of listening.
Powerful stuff. Again, not easy, but that last example gave you an idea of what it looks like to go beyond position and into true interests. And the first example of Hugo Chavez was a great example of just people need to be heard and understood. So how do we apply that now in our own real world scenarios? Well, let's see what's happening here with communication. Remember, we had Julia and Janice. So Julia's going to need to communicate something to Janice in this meeting about the upcoming hopeful promotion, which Janice says is not going to happen. So realize first, each person's coming from their own frames of reference. You saw when we gave each person's description, they're in very different places. And we've got to assume that both have a positive intent, but Julia is going to share her intention. And one thing Julia wants to share is, here's how hard she's been working, and here's the things that she's done to help learn and grow. And that's her intent. She wants to show how much she's learned and grow. So she crafts this message about everything that she's done. She took over for this person while they're away on leave, and she speaks that out into the air. And Janice takes this in, actually hears it, and then interprets that. And that Janice is going to interpret it from her frame of reference. And so Julia's trying to communicate that certainly she's done a lot of work and has grown a lot and has done that. Now, Janice probably interprets what Julia said as, Julia doesn't have an accurate idea of how well she's performing in this job. And she's going to react and say, she hasn't been listening to me and didn't learn from this experience. And so Janice is intending to correct this misperception and decides to craft a message, probably wants to make it, let's soften the blow a little bit, but you can feel the tension rising, and speaks it out and says, but actually, let's go back to that situation with the parents and the kids getting in a fight in the classroom. And Julia's going to interpret that as, Janice didn't listen to a word that I said. So her reaction is probably going to be in the example here of how this communication works on page 3, is probably going to say, well, maybe I need to say it in a different kind of way, in different words. And we're just going to go around this circle, escalating tensions and getting nowhere. The ideal in communication is that my intention when I'm communicating, if I'm Julia, exactly matches the way Janice interprets it. Now, I don't have a lot of control over Janice. So the communicator is going to do what Julia is going to do, what she does. The job of interpretation and being accurate about that, as William Ury said, we're going to put the spotlight on the other person, and I've got to interpret it from their frame of reference. So how do I make sure that these things exactly match? Here's what you have to do in conversations, and you'll recognize it because you've done it with significant others and important relationships, and it works. It's when Julia communicates, here's all the things that I've done and all the work that I've put in, and I took on this extra responsibility. What Janice needs to say in response is in Julia's frame of reference. So what I hear you saying is, you've put in a ton of effort and you've got a lot of passion for this job, and you feel like you've been growing in this role. Now, if I'm Janice, I may not agree with that, but what I want to hear, whenever William Ury said that was the sound of a mind opening, what I want to hear Julia say, exactly, you get me. Not only did you correctly interpret what I said, but you're valuing me as a person because you're willing to speak that out loud, whether you agree with it or not. That's a confirmed paraphrase, right? I've paraphrased as Janice what I'm saying, and I got confirmation that it was right. Now we can move on. Now, it doesn't always work that well. sometimes I'm going to try my best to interpret what that other person's saying, and I'm going to get things wrong. And is that a problem? No. It shows your willingness to understand. I may, as Janice say, what I hear you saying is that you've struggled a bit in this role, but you feel like you're making progress. And Julia may say, not quite. It's actually, there have been some roadblocks, but I feel like I've overcome them and really grown a lot. And so Janice say, oh, so it's more like it's all about the growth for you. And you feel like you've done a lot, put a lot of effort into that, and you're seeing some success. Yeah, that's exactly it. Now we're really communicating. But if I, as Janice, just react to what I heard and try to correct Julia, the temperature is going to increase and we're going to get nowhere. But there's this great thing called the law of reciprocity. If I start doing this paraphrasing, just like when William Ury was listening to Hugo Chavez and Hugo Chavez finally asked, what should I do? It's when he saw 30 minutes of listening, he's like, you know what? Maybe I should listen to this guy too. And that's the magic. So in listening, you're going to listen for not only the content, you don't want to sound like a parrot just repeating exactly what the person said, but also the emotion and the meaning behind it. What's the passion behind it? So rephrase what you've heard that person until they confirm that you understand, that you got what they said. That's where that genuine connection is made. Now, that's really helpful, but there's another catch, is when we're in these conversations, we're afraid to talk about feelings sometimes. And if we do, we say, you made me feel this way. Well, here's some interesting research for you. That really leads to how we should talk in these conversations. They found a bunch of people who were terrified of spiders and they put them in a room with a spider. Now, does that sound terrible? It's pretty terrible, but the spider was in a little lucite clear container, but it was a large spider. And they had people do one of three things. So I had three groups of people. Group one was told to say, hey, if you're frightened of the spider, say it. I'm anxious and frightened by that ugly, terrifying spider. Just speak it out loud. And there was another group that's told, reframe that. Hey, looking at that little spider isn't going to hurt me. Being in the room with the spider isn't going to hurt me. It's in a clear container. It can't get out. And the third group was told to just distract themselves. Hey, I enjoy binge watching old episodes of The Office or anything besides spider talk. So they had these three different groups in the room, and then they measured two things. One, which group got the closest, and you'll see something else that was measured before. Which group do you think got the closest? So when I first read this, I thought it'd be group number two. We're going to reframe things for the positive. Actually, that wasn't the case. The group that got the closest and had less of a fear response, less of that cortisol stress hormone response, was the group that just spoke out loud their feelings. Hey, I'm feeling anxious, frightened by that ugly, terrifying spider. When we speak it out loud, it takes away the mystery. And the same thing is true if we write it. It takes the emotion out of it. In these situations, we must talk about feelings, not how someone else is making me feel, but just how I feel. I'm feeling, so if my church is talking about going from 2 services to 1, and my service, let's say it's the contemporary worship service, is going away, I need to be able to, not say you're taking away something I love, right? That's you making me feel some way. It's, I feel sad about that because that's the way I connect with my faith. I feel most connected spiritually. That kind of conversation is going to lower the temperature. But again, I have to start it and own it. Now, here's a trick, and I call it the unload the weapon technique, right? Is I know if we're in a tough conversation and I'm going to say something and the other person's going to provide their point of view and try to outduel me, and then I'm going to try to outduel them with more data and more information, or maybe even more scripture passages that back up what I say. All right, rather than do that, how about I just accelerate conversations? You see it here by assuming positive intent and paraphrasing what I believe the other person's position, intention, and emotion is at the moment. But doing that in a way that I think they will absolutely agree with it. So let's take that. We're going to go from 2 services to 1 example. So I might walk in and say, hey, I totally understand the need to go to 1 service. We don't have as many people in our congregation. It doesn't make sense from a resource standpoint. And so I get that. And I get that the traditional service is one that people have a lot of passion around because they've grown up with it and it's the way they connect spiritually. And so when I start to paraphrase the other side's point of view like that, what I should see is them, if I'm doing it right, I'll see them start to nod. Yeah, you're right. You're right. We don't have the resources. And that's when I can say, my concern for us is that we also have a part of the congregation that connects in a different way. So is there a way that we can do both, or at least get both groups what they need in order to connect spiritually? If I can start to speak out loud the likely intent of other people in a way that they start to nod and agree with, then they don't feel like they have to articulate that to me because I've already listened to it, even without them having to speak. So so if you're in a tough conversation, just come and say, hey, here's how I imagine you're feeling about this. And here's the good reasons you have for your position. Am I right on that? And you think this and you believe that. Is that true? You're going to see them start to nod. That's the sound or the view of a mind opening. So back to our real world example, coaching Janice in this conversation. I said, listen, you're probably going to be tempted to talk about Julia, and here's the things that happen. I said, that's not going to be helpful. Julia knows what happened. She was there. She may have a different interpretation of it, but you need to convey to Julia that you value her because Janice said, I do. You do believe she'll get there one day. Now's not exactly the right time for that promotion, and so Janice said, I went in and it was super uncomfortable, but I said, hey, Julia, so here's how the conversation started. I'm sure you're a little anxious about this conversation. I am too. We're talking about a promotion. The first thing I want you to know is that I absolutely value you and know that you've been putting in a lot of work and you have a lot of passion for this job. And sure, there have been a couple of things that didn't go as expected, but I know you're putting your heart and soul into it. And she said, and Julia started to nod. Yeah, you're right. It's like Julia didn't even have to say a word to feel heard and listened to. And then Janice said, and at the same time, I'm thinking about the role and safety in the classroom and the well-being of the kids, and also the interaction with parents is so critical for a teacher. And I know you've grown in that role. At this point in time, I don't know that you're ready to do that without some supervision and some more mentoring on that. Now, I'm fully confident that you'll get to that role. And so this conversation ended. Now I asked, was Julia happy? And she said no. But what happened was they were able to come back it was a slow and steady conversation. And they were able to come back in the second conversation and actually do some problem solving, say, what will that mentoring look like? And what can accelerate my growth and development in this job? That actually strengthen the relationship and strengthen the collaboration. So in these conversations, they don't need to end with everyone happy, but if we can demonstrate, and it starts with us, if we can demonstrate we're listening even before the other person speaks, if I take it on as my job to try to articulate that other person's point of view so well that they say, yeah, you really got it. You really got me. They're going to be more apt to listen to us, and we're more likely to get to that collaborative response. So that's the goal. Lower that temperature of the difficult conversation by clarify those true interests, assume positive intent, and use that confirm paraphrase, and even paraphrase before people are talking in a way that they'll agree with. So they don't feel trapped, we don't feel misunderstood, and we don't feel dismissed, but instead feel like there's lots of options. We feel completely understood and we feel valued. And that's the goal. We have the tools to do it. We just have to put it into practice. So that's where we go next, is the application. There's a place in your resource guide for you to just make some notes on your real conversation. Prepare for that conversation by applying the tools. You may want to do this in consort with some other people who may be outside the conversation that can provide some perspective, or maybe make it easier to see the other person's point of view. But try to clarify the true interest, identify new alternatives that you and the other person are more likely to find mutually beneficial. Assume and acknowledge the positive intent of those with whom you disagree. Hearing you state their valid motive is going to help de-escalate the conversation. Paraphrase their point of view until they agree that you understand their interests, and only then will they begin to be open to hearing your side. And finally, just ask some open-ended, truly curious questions to encourage collaboration. Why is it that you want what you want? And help me understand that. And that's going to help us move beyond, navigate these tough conversations, to move into a place of collaboration and genuine relationship building. The opportunity is there. We just have to seize it. So for your next roundtable discussion, here are some thoughts. Discuss what strategies were most helpful, how you employed them. Share best practices that seem to work for specific scenarios so other people can leverage your growth and learning, sometimes trial and error. And then this can be helpful, is to compile a list of ground rules you could share prior to having a tough conversation that could prevent challenges, encourage this productive dialogue, and strengthen the relationship. I know some organizations have said, all right, at the outset of this, we're going to write down and try to paraphrase what each person most wants out of this in a way that the other person will agree with it. So, or say, you have to paraphrase what the other person said, and they acknowledge that you understood them before you can articulate your own point. I mean, it's fair to establish those ground rules. And when people follow those, it can be a much more productive conversation. So thanks for taking part in this. I hope you found it valuable. And I really hope that you'll put it into practice and be able to share what you've learned with others, so that you can grow as a community and grow your relationships and grow your congregations, so that all of us can be a little more like Jesus. Thanks a lot, everybody.